Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had your short break. So now we're going to go on with our next exciting topic on strength and conditioning support for Tokyo 2021 by our speaker, Andrew Pei. Andrew is a strength and conditioning coach at Singapore Sports Institute, SSI, with a Master of Exercise Science on strength and conditioning from Edinburgh University. He is currently working with swimming, badminton, para-swimming, and slingers. Prior to joining SSI in 2018, he was with the Football Association of Singapore and Home United Football Club. Let's welcome Andrew to share more about strength and conditioning support for badminton in preparation for Tokyo 2021. Andrew.
Hi everyone, welcome to Singapore Sports Science Symposium from Youth to Elite. I'm Andrew Tay, S&C coach at Singapore Sports Institute. Today I'll be presenting S&C support for Tokyo 2021 badminton. Content-wise, I'll talk about periodization, block versus traditional, circuit breaker phase 1, circuit breaker phase 2, and Tokyo 2021. Goals of periodization. What is it? Firstly, is to optimize athlete performance at a predetermined time point or maintain performance capacity for sports with a specific season. Managing training stress, promote long-term development of athlete, minimize overtraining potential. Lastly, structuring precise training intervention to target the development of very specific physiological and performance outcomes which underline target performance gains. Training periodization-wise, typically we have a two training model. One is a block, the other is a traditional. In a block training model, what we do is develop one ability, then move on to the next one, and the third and the fourth. So in the S&C-wise is firstly, working on strength and endurance, moving on to strength, then power. But in a traditional block periodization approach, what happens if we would want to target all those abilities, the strength, endurance, strength, and power at the same time? So for badminton itself, during the first circuit breaker phase 1 itself, this is a schedule which they had on a weekly basis. In the morning, they have their runs and S&C program, and in the afternoon, they'll do badminton-related training. As you can see from the schedule, we have I had 3 sessions with them in the morning, on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. So on these 3 times, they will go through a power endurance, strength endurance, and power endurance on the week 1 and 3. 2 and 4, we switch it up. You do a strength endurance, power endurance, and strength endurance. So the question comes, why a multi-approach during circuit breaker? Why not target one ability at a time and target everything at the same time? Why is it so? Firstly, because we are not sure how long circuit breaker will be and when competition will resume. Thus, it's very difficult to plan how we want to move about in terms of planning. 2, during circuit breaker, a lot of the athletes are staying home, and the last thing we want is a monotony of training, which can occur because of one-dimensional focus of training. And 3, loss of training effect because of lack of training stimulus. So, an example, if I was to start a strength endurance phase during the first month, what will happen is they will increase muscular endurance, but like every other training phase, there's always a pros and cons. So during a strength endurance phase, the cons are you will decrease maximum power generating capacity, decrease maximum leg and hip strength, decrease maximum jumping capacity. So if this happened and after the first month they have to compete again, it will not be a good scenario for them. Thus, because we are unsure of when competition will resume, we did a multi-target block approach in a form of trying to maintain whatever they have up to that point. So these are the kind of exercises they did during the strength endurance and power endurance phase. Weight single leg squat, weighted backpack push-up, weighted single leg RDL, weighted bend over row, weighted multi-lunges, weighted shoulder press, weighted single leg hip thrust, IYT, and Copenhagen adductors. For the power endurance, split jerk, squat jump, plyo push-up, weighted lateral jump, weighted split lunges, push press, and weighted single leg multiple hop per side. In terms of structure, we went on a monthly basis. So week 1, week 2, week 3, you'll increase the set from 3, 4 to 5. And during the last week, there's a slightly load week for them. You go back to 3 sets. The work to rest ratio is 1:1, and it's a time-based rather than a rep-based as most of the time during this circuit breaker, we did it over Zoom. So and it's the whole group of badminton rather than one or two. So in order to facilitate for everyone who are on different levels itself, time-based allows me to control the session a bit better. So after circuit breaker phase 1, we came to circuit breaker phase 2. So during this phase, our Olympic athletes could come out and train. So in this phase, they had morning court training, and in the afternoon they dropped by SSI for their runs and SNC training. So one of the issues faced during this phase was court training and gym training was of two different places. And as you know, sports school and SSI is quite far apart, and most of the athletes, they travel by public transport. So they have a morning training from 8:30 to 11, and then once they end training, they had to shower, eat, and travel to SSI for 3 p.m. strength training itself. And as you know, traveling time is about 1.5 hours, which doesn't really leave them a lot of time to rest. So one of the factors coming to this phase, playing for program wise, was to factor in the fact that fatigue might be a factor coming in. So in terms of prioritization wise, I did block approach. Why? Because one, we know there won't be any competition for the next 2 to 3 months, and in a block prioritization wise, we could, able to just focus on things before we move on to the next stage. So we did from strength endurance, maximum strength, strength power, and power. In terms of weekly, the block prioritization wise, we went with a 3 up, 1 down. So we'll increase the training load every week, and on every 4th week, we'll deload it. So why do we not want to do a traditional training program? Reason being, we don't want a blender effect. What is a blender effect? So blender effect happens when we want to do lots of training, lots of stuff like plyometrics, core training, strength training, speed training, power training. What happens if you have so much different training modality? Training is not sequenced, inability to induce phase potential, workload becomes excessive, overtraining and injury happens, and can cause negative load interaction. So from a research point, one of the major limitations of traditional prioritization itself is energy supply, cellular adaptation, post-exercise recovery, compatibility of various workload, mental concentration, sufficient of training stimulus for progress, and lastly, competitive activities. So just to go through a few key points, energy supply, why does it affect? Because everyone has a level of training tolerance. So what happens is, let's say you come in during the first week, we do maybe strength, speed, endurance, plyo, so maybe 3 to 4, 5 factors. What happens with time, we know that on the ground is every factors, you'll be doing a bit more. You're trying to increase the training load on every factors. And with time, there's only so much an athlete can handle. So if more and more factors coming in, then the training tolerance will be more than 100%. And that's what typically lead to overtraining or injuries, because the body is unable to recover because of the added stress over time. Cellular adaptation wise, as you can see in this structure, resistance training and endurance training, in the cellular adaptation, is 2 different pathways. So the body knows, when you do a certain exercise, it interacts differently in the body. So the way you want to have muscle hypertrophy is very, very different from mitochondrial biogenesis. And as you know, in research, there's a lot of things talk about concurrent training. So why is concurrent training such a big thing? Is because if you go to do resistance training and endurance training too close to each other, what happens is they'll produce a substrate called TSC1/2. So what happens is this is it'll mute the strength gain during the resistance training. That's why they always recommend try to do it separately, don't do it too close, or if you're doing a high aerobic phase, don't do power training because you will not benefit as much. So that's the reason why there's a lot of things going on in terms of concurrent training. Okay, so let's talk about program structure. So typically you come to the gym, you'll do 2 parts. One is the warm-up, which there's plyometrics involved, and secondly, the main program, which is the strength program itself. So for warm-up during the plyometrics, every phase there's different objectives that I want to achieve during the strength endurance phase, strength power phase, and power phase itself. So let's talk a bit on the strength endurance phase. So during the strength endurance phase, what the athlete will do is a low hurdle hop, focusing on landing, and a 50 meters run. So in terms of plyometrics itself, there's typically two things we want to look at, whether it's a high or low impact, or is it a long contact time or short contact time. So for the first phase, I want to focus a bit more on eccentric absorption and low impact and long contact time. And as we progress to the strength phase, I'll end a sled push, a low hurdle hop, and pro agility. Same thing with the plyometric itself. We move to a low impact momentum and a shorter contact time. Focus a bit more on concentric production. Moving to the strength power phase, they'll do a sledge push and pull, single leg hop, and a pro agility. In terms of plyometrics, the focus will be continuous jump, high impact, and low ground contact. Lastly, in the power phase, we'll do a sled push and pull, depth jump, single leg hop, and pro agility. Focus-wise, will be more on a depth jump, looking at high impact and short ground contact. Most of the plyometric done during this warm-up is low volume itself, because it's not the main exercise. What I wanted to achieve out of this is to allow them to have introduction to plyometrics and to break things down for them to focus a bit more on. So in the strength endurance phase, research done by Sukamel on resistor training methods. They look at all kinds of training exercises: body weight, machine-based, weightlifting, plyometric, eccentric, unilateral, bilateral, all kinds of training. So what they look at is all these training methods, right? Whether it's in hypertrophy phase, strength or power, which exercise has the greatest potential. So for hypertrophy phase or strength and endurance wise, it's eccentric training, bilateral exercise, and variable resistance. So these three seems to have one of the biggest potential during this phase. So for me, in terms of choosing out of these three, as they're coming out of phase one, circuit breaker, I didn't want to add too much things they're not used to. So we started something basic. And of course, one of the biggest take point for me is thinking about whether should I do more bilateral exercise or unilateral. But of course, based on research, seems bilateral exercise seems to have a slightly greater potential. And also with bilateral exercise, less time is needed to complete compared to unilateral. So it serves the purpose during the phase two, whereby this the athlete could be in and out of the gym within a specific time. They can't loiter around. And so with this research, it kind of helps lead or guide the program. So hypertrophy wise, one of the biggest thing about hypertrophy or strength endurance is the training volume load. So in order to make the muscle grow, it's less dependent on strain or resistance, but more on the total extent of training unit, which is the volume load. So how do you calculate volume load? Is load times reps. So this will have a higher determination compared to just how heavy or how light you lift. So then, how does how heavy or how light you lift influence? So the intensity of the bulk seems to influence intramuscular neural coordination to a greater extent than it does muscular growth. So in terms of research-wise, they seem to find that when you do a bit on a low load, you work more on the type 1 fibers, your slow twitch fibers. But when you work more on your high load, you kind of recruit more on your type 2 fibers. So maybe that's how, your load kind of plays a part in terms of how much type 1 and type 2 fibers you kind of want to work at. But in terms of hypertrophy-wise, total volume load accomplished is the ultimate stimulator of muscle growth. So another thing we look at during this phase is, as you know, training load is there's a lot of reps come into it, there's a lot of sets come into it. So then the question comes, do the athlete need to train to failure, and whether training to failure will help improve performance? So from this research, it shows that training to failure does not result in significantly greater gains than not training to failure. So, which is a good thing for me. Thus, I do not need to always max out the reps the athlete is always doing. I could have a bit of buffer, allow them to recover, and still have significant gains compared to always, pushing them to the limit, not really to the limits, but to failure rather. So, how does it work? So, example, maybe during a strength endurance phase, let's say, I'm working in reps of 10. So, based on this chart, 75% of 1RM seems to be the max you could do in terms of load for 10 RM. So when playing for a program wise, it's not necessary to always have working at 75% for 10 reps. You could even work 67%, 70%, even 65% for 10 reps to have a bit of buffer, depending on where the athlete is in that week or in that month itself. So as to, one, you do not push the athlete to the red zone or overtraining. Two, since from the research shows that we could have significant gains as well, we could still have gains while safeguarding the athlete. So in terms of exercise-wise, things we did was like barbell split jerk, barbell squat, bench, RDL, pull-ups, hip thrust, and shoulder press. So when I came into this phase after circuit breaker phase 1, I just wanted to go back to basic stuff, things they're comfortable with. Don't need so much monitoring, don't need me to be a spotter there, because coming out, one of the things is trying to have social distancing itself. So going back to exercise they're comfortable with, which they have spent a lot of time in, I could step back and allow them to do the exercise without being there to spot them as much. In terms of sets, we worked about 4 to 5 sets as we progress. Rep range was 5 to 10. Reason why it was 5 to 10 was because since they came back from circuit breaker, I wasn't sure where they are, but I had their 1RM just before circuit breaker start. So I could plan the program with where they were before and to see how they cope as the load progressed. So yes, the objective was to complete as much as you can, maybe 10 reps, but just in a scenario whereby they don't, I know, okay, that's the limit in terms of load they could handle, and I could readjust the program the next session or the next week onwards. Of course, the objective is to progressively build load tolerance. So an example, let's say a barbell squat, this is what they did. Week 1, 4 sets, we went from 40%, 50%, 60, and 60%. Reps wise, in week 1, 2, and 3, it's all the same, it's all 10 reps. So I gave them a specific load they would carry, and of course, because I told them 5 to 10 reps, right? So I will observe how well they could lift and whether they could hit the target. Thus, if they could, then I could always progress the load the following session on the following week. So as you can see in the week 2, for this particular athlete, at the load at 65%, he or she could only complete 9 reps. Yeah, he did hit 10, but it was close enough. So I know, okay, the next week I could really progress and not have to worry that he or she cannot cope with the load. So the next week, which was the third week, which was the highest training load in a month, before they go for deload for that week, instead of 40%, which they always start with, we went with 50, 60, 65, and of course trying to hover around the 70%. So as you can see, the athlete could complete every set, and of course the reason why they were so 70% was so I could see whether they could sustain the same workload now with another set. And of course, it shows, yes, you could hit the workload, but of course, to sustain seems to be one thing that you can try and focus on and to work upon. So in terms of a deload week, so this week, the plan was to move away from all the barbell work, drop the load a bit, and focus a bit more on unilateral exercises. So things that they could kind of do on their own without me supervising or without them coming to the gym. So it's a refresher course, just going through some basic exercise you can do back on court, you know. So with it, sets was 3, reps was 10. Load wise, was a 2 reps in reserve. So what it means is, they'll pick a weight where they don't have to do to 10, but they're able to have have a 2 spacing of reps. So at least in that sense, I know that they're not pushing it to failure. So the next thing you go into is the strength phase. So same thing from the research, strength-wise. What do we see? In terms of resistance training methods, there seems to be no change in terms of from hypertrophy to strength. Exercise choice-wise, eccentric training, bilateral exercise, variable resistance, stay the same from hypertrophy to strength. So we could kind of say that if the exercise doesn't really change, maybe then loads play a very big part during the strength phase to really, get the rate of force development up on the type 2 fibers. So one thing to look at is muscular factors affecting strength. So what affects your maximum strength? 1, your muscle cross-sectional area, muscle fiber type, motor unit recruitment patterns, muscle architecture, and pennation angle. So based upon literature, it is clear that the following must be addressed to maximize muscular strength and power development. Increase your muscle cross-sectional area, increase your type 2 fiber, increase recruitment of type 2 fibers, and increase the number of cyclomeres laid down in parallel and series, and of course increase in angle of pennation. So all these factors need to be met, so that you could be strong and to maximize the strength and power development. So strength, one of the most basic thing about strength is motor unit recruitment. So what does Henneman's size principle say? It says that generally a large motor unit is activated in response to a higher external load. Thus, as you can see, while during the strength phase, we always in the weight room wise, we always try to advocate try to shift work on higher workload, whether is it your 75% or 85 or even your 90%. Why? Because in most instances, upper limit of motor unit recruitment seems to be 85% of MVC, maybe as low as 60% depending on the muscle. Yeah. So other than external load, which plays a part, another factor is the speed of contraction and type of muscle contraction. So one thing we know, external load plays a big part in recruiting more motor unit recruitment. Secondly, motor unit recruitments are activated earlier during rapid contraction. As many as 3 times as many motor units are activated with rapid contraction. So moving a load fast also helps to recruit your motor units recruitment. So in terms of program, they did a split jerk, trap bar squat jump, barbell squat, barbell bench, RDL, weighted pull-up, barbell hip thrust, shoulder press, and calf raises. So there's just a few changes. We went with the split jerk, trap bar. So the reason why I did that at the start is to lay certain exercise so I could bring forward to the next phase. So these are just introduction. It's light load, focusing more on technique so that when they shift to the next strength of power phase, when I use them, I don't have to go through the technique again. So in terms of the main exercises wise, we work up to 5 sets. Rep range was 3 to 5. Load, we work up from 50% to 85%. Objective wise was progressive build load tolerance for more than 80% 1RM. So same thing again, let's use squat as an example. From week 1, week 2, and week 3. We did across 5 sets. Same thing, rep, was a range. So just in case they fail, they cannot hit a particular rep count at a higher load. I know that's the limit. And as we progress, we try to spend more time on the 80%. So in this side, you could see week 2 and week 3, right, is similar. Then you will be wondering, why is it the case? So same thing, on the ground, yes, we do plan, always progressive, week 1, week 2, week 3, let's build it up if we come down. But of course, same thing, on the court, the coach was pushing the athletes quite a bit. And because this was almost the second month, going to the third, the court training, they did turn up the volume. And of course, with that, fatigue sets in and stuff. So to help, mitigate that and to allow them to, train on court on the third week, rather than push them, we stayed the same, had a bit of quality sets before moving on to the next phase. So same thing for the deload week. They did overhead squat, Bulgarian split squat, Nordic curl, dumbbell bend over row, reverse fly, pull over, butterfly, calf raises, shoulder press, front and lateral raises, Copenhagen adductors. Set wise was 3, reps was around 10, load was same thing, two reps in reserve, same thing working on unilateral exercises, moving away from the barbell stuff, and of course the overhead squat is something I could work with when we shift the power phase. So that will be a bit more on teaching them Olympic lift, which will happen at the end. Okay, let's talk about strength power phase. So during this phase, what changes was, at the start, remember they went to sports school for core training, then SSI for their runs in the gym. So what happened during this phase in end of September, they came back to OCBC Arena to train. So then, it was a good thing, so they could have a rest in between, the core training and gym during the days they have it. But one thing that happened was they have core training after strength training. So the following video, I'm going to show you what they did, after strength training. So as you can see, typically after a strength training, they go to court, and this in badminton is called footwork. So what they did is, as you can see, basically it's just plyometrics. So they have 4 shuttle cords getting to all 4 corners, and that's just 1 round. So they can do, minimum 8 rounds of it or even more than that. So as you can see, there's a lot of high contact time in terms of plyo. And thus during this phase, even though we are shifting to a bit of strength power, we be mindful that after the strength training, they're going to court to do lots of jumping. And of course, in badminton, overuse injury seems to be one of the contribution to injuries. So in order to manage it, I can kind of tailor the amount of volume done during this period. Okay, but first thing, let's take a look. Same thing, resistance training methods. So in power, what are the high potential exercises we can choose from? 1, weightlifting exercises, potentiation complex exercises, and your ballistic training. So these 3 seems to have a high potential in terms of power itself. So one thing to note, in all sports, power is a very important factor. The end game or end goal in training is let's get more powerful. But let's not forget that strength plays a very big part in power training. So from a research, it shows that when you compare strong athlete against weak, so example, same thing, back squat, an athlete who can squat more than 2 times body weight compared to maybe 1.4 times body weight, what happens is when they look at power itself, peak power at all loads was stronger with the stronger athlete than the weaker athlete. And load at peak power occurs is 30% higher in stronger athletes when compared to weaker athletes. So yes, as much as you want to spend a lot of time in power training, but if your athlete is not strong enough, then the carryover of that power training is not effective compared to someone who's really have a good base of strength level coming into a power training. So that's why it's very important to have the block periodization, try to layer in the strength before shifting to power training itself. So what does research says in terms of optimal load, comparing different exercises? So, and as you can see on the left side, you have your elbow flexion, bench press, bench throw, squat jump. If you look at most of it, the load range, right, is typically from 30 to 70%. Very few do we have in terms of high load, high velocity training. So what does that mean? So in this study, they look at 3 exercises: a squat, a jump squat, and a power clean. Of course, from a squat, regardless of how heavy the load, the peak power kind of stay the same. While for this jump squat and power clean, it seems that for this jump squat, the optimal range seems to be from 30 to 70%. While if an athlete needs to work on a high load, high velocity, then power clean seems to have a greater effect. So if in terms of power training itself, what does it show is that once you start to pick up the load, there's a cap at certain exercise, and thus if you want to work at the high end of it, the really high force, high speed, then maybe weightlifting exercise could come to play in order to achieve that. So as mentioned, relative power output for various exercise. our typical bench, squat, deadlift kind of exercise, what are they? They are typically a high force, low velocity movement. And of course, once we shift into our counter movement jumps, your jump squat, it's a low force, high velocity movement. And in order to get a moderate to high force and moderate to high velocity movement, studies seems to show that different versions of your weightlifting exercise seems to be able to target that. And of course, in order to hit your high force and high velocity movement, you need your jerk, your snatch, and your clean. And a lot of studies have shown that weightlifting has been shown to have very high power output for power training itself. So in terms of exercise, what was done for strength power phase for them? They did barbell split jerk, trap bar squat jump. One key difference during this phase, was introducing of isometric training. So as I mentioned, during this phase, they had cord training after a gym. So in order to safeguard them, we shift from dynamic movement to a more isometric training itself. So in terms of sets and reps, sets was around 3. We didn't really go more than that because it's a new phase and there's additional training. So in order to allow them to cope with cord training, we kind of kept it during this phase. So for reps wise, the ISO was about 3 to 5. Depending on exercise, some was 10-second hold, some was 6 seconds hold. Yeah. Lower body power was about 5 reps. So like your trap bar squat jumps, your box squat, your box jump kind of exercises, and your upper body was a bit more on the higher range, so 10 reps. Load wise, I was kind of looking for a low force, high velocity because of kind of exercises they could do, and it was an introduction to strength power phase. So we started a bit more on a low force, high velocity. Objective was the isometric potential complex. So why isometric training during this phase? So what's the advantage of it? So from a study, it shows that it's safer than dynamic mode, which was good for me. As training load picks up during this 3rd month for almost across all sport. So if they can do less to have more, why not? And of course, isometric training itself less fatiguing than dynamic mode, which is also good because I could save the athlete, have them a bit more space to recover in between rather than pushing them on all ends, whether it's court or gym. Then of course, one of the things that we worry about is whether would there be overtraining or injuries that sets in. Thirdly, superior in increasing joint angle specific strength. So same thing, trying to find a position which they are weak in. So like a squat, it's typically at the bottom compared to the top, which they're not as strong. So with isometric training, I could set them at the bottom or even half squat to focus on that strength at the bottom up. And of course, we know isometric training seems to increase muscle tendon stiffness, which shows to have an increase in isometric and dynamic rate of force development, which is very important to power training, rate of force development. And of course, a greater increase post-isometric training as compared to dynamic mode of strength training. So same thing, last week of the strength power phase, which is the deload week, they did things similar to during the strength phase. So you just get back to the view of unilateral exercise, 3 sets, 10 reps, same thing, load 2 reps in reserve. So typically why we have a bit of deload week is because on core training wise, there's not much of a deload. It's kind of like a gradual increase in volume. Thus, in order to help the athlete to facilitate recovery and stuff, that deload week on every 4th week seems to help. It helps them to recharge, to refocus for the next phase. So lastly, power phase. Kind of exercises we went through was split jerk, a fast eccentric squat, a barbell squat jump, plyo push-up, kettlebell swing, drop broad jump, a pull-up, which is done fast, a trap bar jump, lateral jump, singlet multi-hop, and a dumbbell squat to press. So as you can see, it's a lot on the lower limbs. In terms of sets wise, we did 3 to 4. Since in the strength and power, we just maintain at 3. Moving on to the next phase, having built that base foundation of 3 sets, we could ramp it up to bit 4 to increase the training load. Rep range was about 5 to 10 depending on exercises. Load, we did a range from 30 to 70%. Objective was moderate force and moderate to fast velocity. So the question comes, okay, why fast eccentric? Why not? Typically eccentric, we know is done slowly. You want to control it down, control as slow as you can. But with this research done, it shows that fast eccentric compared to slow eccentric increase the bilateral lower body rate of force development more, and also they increase the quads VR muscle facet length more than a slow. So then comparing fast and slow seems that fast has a better positive reinforcement compared to a slow eccentric. So couple of things they note during this study was that despite the constant increase in rate of force development with the fast eccentric squatting, your counter movement jump or CMJ performance was not significantly increased in terms of stats. So one of the things they recommend was, okay, you know what, we could get the rate of force development up in the fast eccentric, but not so much in the CMJ. So they recommend adding a CMJ after the fast eccentric, to have a balance. And then of course the load used, they recommend the research was up to 70% of your 1RM. It seems to show a safe and effective increasing your rapid force production with moderate fatigue perception. So let's see how's it been done in the weights room. So the fast drop and the drive. So the drop is about max 1.5 seconds or even less. So when that is done, they do a squat jump. So typically it's about 30% of their 1RM. So this was something introduced to them during this power phase, the fast eccentric complex training itself. So then the deload week comes in. So during this phase, we went through a lot of strength, power, and power. So the next progression wise in terms of exercise selection was, okay, let's try to get better weightlifting exercise done. So then of course during this deload week, I went through with them power snatch, power clean plus jerk. Over the week, kudos to the athlete, they were fast learners, managed to pick it up. So moving forward is something I could use and, get them different variety of it to when I come to the power phase and strength power phase itself. Okay, lastly, looking forward, Tokyo 2021, of course, a lot of things is still not sure yet, but in terms of projection, this is what is shown from January to July. The red highlighted are all the games that's projected currently, and the purple is when the Olympic will be, and the yellow is when the training camp will be. So just a quick glance, it seems like, whoa, there's a lot of games coming in, and if they were to play all the games, technically they won't be around. And of course, we're not sure whether, do they need quarantine or not. That adds up overall. So then, especially this phase right now, leading up to the end of 2020, before 2021, it's trying to lay the foundation, start layering all the strength in it, so that when we come to 2021, if they do have to play lots of games, we can switch it up to a bit more maintenance phase and find periods where we could come in and get some work done. So in order to achieve that, training quality has to be there. And of course, as you can see from this graph, lots of things affects training quality itself. So we start from bottom up. Firstly, the athlete's ability, their history and how motivated they are. Then we move on to the coach's knowledge and personality, not just the coach, but of the athlete, how well they know them, what type of training they need, and of course, facility and equipment, how well, a good environment for them to train, competitions, as you know, in badminton, training wise is a lot of high rep stuff, but one thing they need is competition because everyone has a very different style of play, and our athletes need to kind of know how to play against different style. And of course, lastly, finding from auxiliary science, what it means is just basically your sport science support. All the sciences coming together, giving the inputs to how to better improve this training quality. And hopefully, with this teamwork from the coaches to the backroom staff, the sports science staff, we could help improve our athlete performance and hopefully achieve a good result in Tokyo 2021. So lastly, I want to say thank you for your time in this presentation. And even though I present on SNC stuff, but end of the day, in order to achieve anything, it's a big group. It's a team. It's not just one or two people. So I want to thank everyone that I work with in badminton to help the athlete itself. Yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, the circuit breaker is definitely a challenging experience for many athletes to keep up with their strength and endurance due to lower training and gym loads. So what you've shared is actually really interesting strategies. Thanks a lot. I'm just being conscious of time. We have reached it's about 5:04, so I'm just going to take in one question for you. Andrew, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Okay, so is there any routine tracking of overall session rate of perceived exertion to mitigate injury risk?
Not officially. I mean, okay, like the kind of things the coaches are on the ground, on court, and even in the gym, saw the players. So it's more of a chat with the players and the coach to see how they are doing, how they're feeling. Okay, one reason why we don't do the tracking in terms of like maybe RPE is, yes, it's good to give you a number to track, but one thing we realize that is over time, it may not be so accurate because rate of perceived exertion is kind of how the athlete feels that week. So there's a lot of external factors that might affect how he or she feels that week. And sometimes it may not be the most accurate. So plus the fact that on the ground, we do communicate with the coach and players on almost every 2 to 3 times in a week. So that will give us a base and an idea. Yeah, so I would say on the ground wise, it's more a lot of communication rather than trying to have like a tracking done on a daily basis. Because long term wise, yes, on paper it looks like, yes, it's very good, you can have a number, but we tried before maybe with other sports and stuff, we realized that sometimes it may not give us the most accurate number. And because, for example, like if the athlete, some athletes like to push, some athletes maybe like to hold back a bit more. So with that will kind of affect the way they feel about the session. Yeah, so I would say more on the ground wise, is more communication done with all the coaches and players. Yeah.
That's great. Andrew, I think your video is off.
Yeah,
I'm quite sure everybody would like to see you. Are you having some issues on your side?
Yeah, I think I'm having some issues with the camera. Video.
I see. Okay, yep. No problem at all. We have a lot more questions, and I hope that you can take offline with the rest of the question with the participant.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thanks a lot, Andrew, for sharing the topic with us. I'm quite sure you can see from the question itself, a lot of people are interested to know more, understand, the principle behind it. It's a great sharing. So now that we are coming to the end of today's symposium, as mentioned, there's great topics shared throughout the whole day. I hope you have enjoyed as much as I have. Tune in tomorrow at 9:30 for more exciting topics, starting with sport science support at SSI during uncertain time, from broken circuits to